I'm so glad to have Marcus Cleaver with us today. Mr. Cleaver has a master's in law followed by 3 years teaching at Huddersfield University. Then he worked 3 years at legislation.gov.uk, and he is currently coming up to 3 years now working on Westlaw. And in the meantime, Mr. Cleaver has developed his own YouTube channel as well as his podcast called UK Law Weekly, which updates on recent UK Supreme Court cases. So, Mr. Cleaver, just the first question, quite general and quite, I guess, generic. Why did you decide to pursue law in the first place?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. And please just call me Marcus. That's totally fine.
Okay.
Honestly, the reason I decided to pursue law in the first place was because I thought it was going to make me a lot of money. And that's like the honest answer. I thought I was going to go and sort of like, go to a big city firm and make loads of money and, sort of do that sort of traditional lawyer thing that you kind of see in TV shows and movies where it's like you're working all day just to try and sort of finish this case. And, and I sort of soon realized that was kind of a bad motivation for going into the law. It's not as dramatic or as sort of high profile as it seems in those TV shows and in those movies. And so my original motivation sort of changed. And as I did my law degree, I sort of ended up sort of really pursuing it for the intellectual engagement. So I found it, really challenging, and it developed certain skills, like my writing skills and, argumentation skills and things like that. So I went into it for the wrong reasons. And I think I'd like to think that I've stayed in it for the right reasons.
Yes, that's really interesting. So you touched upon how you like the intellectual engagement with it. So can you just tell us more about, like, is there any particular field of law that you have been spending your time in?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few really. I suppose that one of the areas where I'm most interested in, and this was where my master's was based around, is an area called jurisprudence, which is essentially the philosophy of law. And I find that really interesting just because there's different thinkers through the ages. And when I say through the ages, I really mean it because, you can really trace it back to Plato if you want to go back far enough. And there's different sides to different arguments within jurisprudence about, what is the correct way to think about law. And on a day-to-day basis, it's very easy to get into the idea of sort of, one side of the argument versus another side of the argument, within sort of like, say, a divorce case or something like that. And I think jurisprudence is really interesting because it sort of says, well, let's just take a step back and let's think about the nature of law itself. Some philosophers would argue that, we shouldn't even have a legal system, and that kind of revolutionary thinking is really interesting, and it adds a political dimension to the debate as well, which is something that's quite fascinating too. So yeah, I guess if there was one area that I had to pick out where that element of debate comes in, it's jurisprudence, just because of that higher level debate. Although I suppose there is other areas, within, say, family law or tort law or criminal law where, there's more everyday debates.
Yes, that sounds really interesting. So, you said that you were interested in jurisprudence. Like, was it different from what you originally expect you would be? For instance, like maybe criminal law. I guess a lot of young students are aspiring to like become an attorney or like a barrister or something like that. Have you ever thought about that, or were you this kind of like intellectual person, like wants to get into academia?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely sort of pursued down the academia route, but then, when I was teaching at Huddersfield, one of the courses that I was responsible for was mooting. And mooting is, you have like a mock courtroom, and the students both take two sides of an argument, and they go away and do the research and, then argue that case as if it was a real court case and present it as if they were barristers or solicitor advocates. And, so I definitely sort of have a familiarity with that side. And, I think for any aspiring young law students, I think something like mooting is really worth, getting into. as for me, I think there are interesting debates to be had within every single subject area within law. So if it is criminal law, or if it is family law or immigration law that someone is really interested in, I guess, part of my advice to them would be to think about what are the central debates within that particular area of the legal system. Obviously, you're going to be having debates about within a particular case. So an immigration case might be, should someone stay in the UK or should they be deported from the UK? But there's going to be a wider question there about, what should our deportation policy be? And I think that that's kind of one of the things that I try and get across in my podcast as well, is sort of, let's try and think about not only the case that we have in front of us, but also what's the higher level, what is this saying about our legal system and our political system and our economic system within that thing. So yeah, definitely sort of for any students, just think about those areas that they're sort of interested in, but try and think about the debates to be had within that area.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And so you talked about how you're doing a podcast, and I've listened to loads of it. I really liked it. So do you think that was your greatest accomplishment, or do you think you have other accomplishments that you're more proud of?
It's difficult to say, really. I when you're talking about defining an accomplishment, I guess different people will see that in different ways. And my aim throughout my professional career, but also, my side career doing things on YouTube or with the podcast or things like that, has just always been to sort of try and help people as much as I can. So when I define my greatest accomplishment or something like that, it would definitely be in the context of, have I helped, law students to achieve the grades that they want? And, I get a lot of positive feedback, from the podcast. And I think that has quite a wide audience, because it's not just law students, whether that's A-level or doing their degree or professional solicitors. I think everyone's interested in those cases and get something from them. So it does help a lot of people. But I'd probably say greatest accomplishment was sort of, starting the YouTube channel and probably getting that up to a good number of subscribers. And, a lot of the comments on the YouTube channel are consistently very positive, because I think that people get a lot out of them, and it helps them to maybe understand things that they either maybe misunderstood in a lecture or wasn't explained to them very well, or simply the fact that you can press pause on a YouTube video, which you can't always do if someone's explaining something live in a lecture, although I guess there are more recordings now.
Yes, definitely. Like, I watched one of your videos on the human rights one. I think it was really fascinating, and it was really clear to me, like, as like a beginner of law, of learning law, like what it's all about. So so what is your main drive behind creating podcasts and website? Like, how did you thought of creating podcast for, like, just talking about UK Supreme Court, as well as doing the whole YouTube channel?
The YouTube channel started first, and I started that when I was still a lecturer. And one of the reasons or motivations behind it was kind of like a simplicity thing at first. So I had a lot of students who would come up to me and say, I wasn't able to attend this lecture. Can you sort of explain to me what I missed? And you sort of smile and sort of say, well, that was a 50-minute lecture, and I can't really be giving it out sort of, 3 or 4 times to the different people who missed this lecture. And so the idea originally was just basically to sort of create these videos that hopefully people would be able to look at and they would be able to understand. And if they did miss the lecture that I was giving on a particular topic, then there would be a video to be referred to. And so there wasn't any expectation when I started the YouTube channel that I would have any subscribers at all. It was just sort of like, here's a YouTube link. If you're struggling, then, you might find this useful. And then as I put more videos up there, it sort of became obvious that it wasn't just students at Huddersfield University who were finding it useful, it was sort of students across the UK and even further afield. You know, a lot of the YouTube videos are about EU law. So I have a lot of students from Ireland and Malta and places like that who have found it useful as well. And so it sort of grew. So then when I left Huddersfield, I sort of continued to do it, even though I wasn't teaching anymore, just because of the popularity. And then the podcast kind of emerged out of that. It was sort of like, well, what else can I do? And I think one of the things was that when I left Huddersfield, you know, because I wasn't teaching anymore, there wasn't the same obligation on me to try and keep up with the latest developments in the law. So I was thinking, well, what's the best way that I can do this personally? And that was sort of, you know, reading those different legal cases, but in particular the Supreme Court cases, because obviously that's the highest court in the land, so they're the most influential decisions. And then, of course, I just thought, well, if I'm reading this, you know, there's going to be other people who would want a breakdown of this, so I shouldn't really just hog this knowledge to myself. I should try and explain those decisions to other people. And so, yeah, again, the sort of podcast emerged out of that. And, you know, it was a similar thing with the YouTube channel in terms of growth. I was doing it for my own benefit really as much, you know, originally, because I just wanted to sort of have something that I could, you know, it would prompt me to read the Supreme Court cases, but then it grew in popularity because more people sort of also found it useful. So that was kind of where it came from.